Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Hey everybody, welcome to Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick, and you can contact me in the show at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. You can check out the show's website, leadership.voyage, or please subscribe if you're listening for one of the first times today. Always looking to deliver on our mission of helping people develop their leadership skills wherever they are at in their journey. And that's why we're here, is to help you and give you something to walk away with that you can apply into your life. So thank you so much for being here today. Before I forget, please check out the bottom of those show notes in this episode, and there is a link for Instacart. You can show support for this program by tapping or clicking that link. Going to Instacart, you get free delivery on your first order, $35 or more. Items hand-picked by shoppers, delivered to your doorstep in as fast as an hour. And I myself am a customer, so I can tell you that I vouch for the experience, that Instacart is a solid experience. Go ahead and check it out. So today's guest is Katia Vlachos, and she is a very enjoyable person to speak with, I have to tell you. We divide this conversation into two parts. The first half is more about her personal experience and what she's really written about over time, which is about expats. And I learned a ton from this. I really had never looked into or thought much, honestly, about expatriation, or even about how when we move around in our own lives. And the second half is about reinventing yourself and getting unstuck. So I think you'll find a lot of value out of both halves of this conversation. Anyway, stick around all the way to the end when I give you the episode recap, the highlights of the discussion. Otherwise, enjoy my conversation with Katia Vlachos here on Leadership Voyage. Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Leadership Voyage. I'm happy to be with you all again today, and I am lucky to be with Dr. Katia Vlachos today from Switzerland. Nice to be with you, Katia.
It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. It's nice to have a little brief chat here to start things off before we click the record button. But thank you for being generous with your time at the end of a week overseas compared to where I am in the U.S. So I'm looking forward to digging into a few things with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I'm excited.
You bet. So today I was thinking about this conversation kind of in two sections. And the first, I think I'd like to talk about you and some of your experiences. And there's a book that you wrote and getting into this topic of expats and what that all means. And I'm actually really fascinated because I've realized in preparing for this, I know almost nothing about this topic. So that'll be fun for me. And then the second part I would love to focus on is kind of what you do. And you're a reinvention coach, and how we can kind of help people out there who might feel stuck. And those are kind of the two halves I'm thinking of here. I found your a bio of yours on Huffington Post where it looks like you had contributed, and it says that you are Greek by birth, but a perpetual foreigner by choice. And I found that wording very interesting. It's a 7-year-old biography, so maybe you still identify or don't identify with that wording, but I had to ask you, what's behind that? A foreigner, perpetual foreigner by choice.
I think it's still valid, actually, and we can talk a bit more about foreigner and home and all that. These are all topics that are very close to my heart, but it kind of says that once you leave your country of origin, and I won't say home because, once you leave, you have so many homes. It's very hard to find that sense of belonging that a person who grows up in one place, only knows one place, never moves, never lives anywhere else has. So there's something missing always. And I don't think you ever find that. And of course, there's many rewards to that life that make it, they make it worth it. It's fine. You get used to it, but it's part of that life that wherever you are, or at least I will feel like I'm a little bit of a foreigner. And the irony is I'm also a foreigner where I come from. I'm also a foreigner in Greece, right? There are aspects
Wow.
of me that feel foreign to others. And also this part of me that feels foreign towards others. So if that makes any sense, it's kind of you lose that groundedness you have. You gain a different kind of groundedness, and maybe we'll talk about this. You learn to be at home wherever you are. You learn to be at home with people rather than places, right? So it transforms. It's kind of a different sense of belonging. But when I say perpetual foreigner, it's kind of accepting that this is my life now. I'm it's a different kind of connection I have to location.
Yeah, that's a very interesting distinction, how maybe we focus on the geography of things as opposed to the people, maybe sometimes. And I think so many of us out there can identify with relocating in some form. I was just talking to someone at work yesterday, and I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the US. And then I said, oh, well, actually, I haven't I haven't lived there in 27 years, right? As you said about Greece, maybe you're a foreigner now to the place that you grew up before because you've been away from there for so long, right? It's a fascinating thing to think about, really.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be very different. I mean, if you move within the US or if you move countries, right? Actually, it is pretty similar because the cultures are so different, right? But the idea is once you leave, there's really no going back. Both I think both like in practical terms, but also kind of emotionally in terms of you, the way you are, you change, right? The place you've left behind has changed. So every time you go back, it's kind of a different encounter.
Yeah, no, I'm really kind of fascinated by the topic because, I think we've always said, at least I'm speaking primarily from, a United States upbringing, of course, but like, go away to college, broaden your horizons, things like that. And you're right. As soon as you go do those things and you meet people who aren't like you, when you look back at where you're from, it looks a lot different. It really does. Yeah. Great
Totally.
point.
And there's actually two things. There's a lot of people who go back, like it's called repatriation, right? It's expatriation when you go away and repatriation when you go home. Like maybe you're in the foreign service and then you have like a home stint or whatever. And they expect to go home and everything's going to be like they left it and they're not going to need any support and they're going to be totally like adjusted and they have culture shock, right? Going back home. And what I always tell them is like, no, expect address it or approach it as another expatriation because you're going to a foreign country now, right? It's home and it's not home at the same time. So know what's like, be prepared. And the other interesting thing is what you said about people. You meet your people. You leave your country. You meet other people. You get used to a certain lifestyle. You meet people who have similar backgrounds in terms not where they come from and all that, but in terms of the kind of lifestyle that you're having. Right? You connect, and then there's a lot of people who go back home, and they end up hanging out with foreigners because rather than their compatriots because they're the ones who get them more. Right? Again, shows you how you've changed and you're used to different things and you connect more with people who are used to these different things. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Yeah, no, thanks. I think for people listening, I have to imagine a lot of them can relate to exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, obviously you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, studying it and experiencing it. And you wrote a book a few years back called A Great Move. And in the blurb for that book, it says, I think, over 50 million expatriates are out there. And I don't know what that number is today. But just so that we can kind of calibrate and level set a little bit around it, what, from your point of view and your study, what are the primary reasons that people are moving to a country that's different from their native one?
Interesting. So interesting to ask about the number because I try to get some updates and honestly, it's really hard to get any numbers. Right? Like every website you go to, they're like, yeah, it's very hard to calculate the number of expatriates. So, so that number was like supposed to be 87 million in 2021, 87.5. But again, by some accounts and, the UN says a different number, it's like 281 million. So don't
It's a
even
lot.
start. But it's a lot. And I think, there was maybe a little dip during COVID, but I think it's potentially increasing as well, and it's getting harder and harder to measure or to count. But I find, from my research, my experience, but also my work, I started as an expat coach. So I worked a lot with people who make these kinds of transitions. There's three key reasons. One is career/economics. So, better prospects or work assignments, or very specific, or better financial prospects. So that's one part. Then you have love. We call them love paths.
Okay.
So you follow somebody abroad. And the third one that some people will do, maybe a smaller percentage, is adventure and broadening of horizons. And not just single people, but also people with families. Like, I want to show my kids something different. I want them to have a different experience. I want them to learn a new language and just like open their eyes to the world. So these are the three key reasons I have found are the most relevant. Here, I want to specify that I'm talking, the expats I'm talking in that book are voluntary skilled migrants. Those
Right.
are, it's their choice to do that most times.
Right.
So yeah, there's
Right.
a lot of cases where it's not, right, obviously. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about that a little bit this morning. Again, like I said early on, it just hit me like how little I know about this topic. And I was thinking like, wow, that doesn't even think about immigration. And, we're not going to get into politics or any of that. But in the US, it's like the number one issue people are concerned about, maybe other than economy right now, and so that's a whole other bucket. Maybe we'll just kind of acknowledge that it's a thing, and that's not what we're talking about today. But
no, it's a choice element that makes a difference here.
Yeah. Thanks for acknowledging that. We talked a little bit, kind of just touched on some of these ideas of what happens when you make these moves. What are the emotional impacts on a person or on a family when they do indeed move to a new country?
So many. Good and bad. No, there's no bad. I think it's more about how you approach it, right? So one key thing to know, and I talk a lot about it in the book, is there's a process of transition, and it's important to understand that process. So yes, of course, every move, every transition is unique, but there are certain stages you go through, and there's research on that. So there's like something called the U curve of adjustment, or the U curve of culture shock, which has distinct stages. You have the honeymoon stage, the crisis, then you have recovery, and then adjustment, and they may have slightly different names depending on the researcher, but it's kind of, it shows you, like the honeymoon, you start hi, everything is new and exciting, and after a while you realize you're not a tourist and this is your life and you can't just leave. And then there's like a little bit of a crisis, or a lot of a crisis, it depends, right? And then as time passes and you start getting used to things, and you start accepting rather than resisting, or you start seeing the silver linings, then you have the recovery. And in the end, where you can actually say, hey, I feel at home here. I feel like, I'm more stable, I'm more grounded. That's the kind of the adaptation phase. And those stages are more or less the same, but the duration or the sequence, they can vary widely. I've had a move where I didn't have a honeymoon at all. I went straight into crisis. Or I had honeymoons that could have been 3 months or 2 years. It really depends on so many other factors, on the person, on the circumstances, on whether you move with a family or not. So
right.
One big impact is the impact of the actual transition stages on you. And if you don't know what's coming, it can really hit you hard, right? You can feel homeless, and you can feel depressed, or you can feel anxious. Like, there's all sorts of things that can happen. If you have a sense of what's coming, you feel less alone. You can anticipate, you can get support if possible. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So awareness makes a big difference with this one. Another important set of challenges has to do with personality. Some people adapt better than others. And, again, in the book, I talk about different personality traits, like the big five, and how, being an extrovert versus an introvert makes a difference. Or being more open to new experiences, or being more emotionally stable. So there's different traits that make you that can make it easier for you. Therefore, the impact, the emotional impact, may vary. Now, another thing, of course, is the whole idea of home, and whether you're prepared to create a new home, and whether you know what you need to feel at home. When you land into a new place, you haven't thought about these things, you can feel homesick, you can feel isolated. You're far from your support system. You usually have to start from scratch. All that can weigh on a person, right? You move alone, and they're kind of, you feel lonely. You're not connected when you land somewhere and you don't know anybody. Or maybe you move with a family, and your partner is deeply unhappy and hates it there, or your kids are having trouble at school. Again, emotional impact, the whole family. Creating home is kind of like one of the pillars of my method, or whatever you want to call it. Is like, know what you need, know where you're going to look for it. Of course, do your homework and preparation and all that, but it's more about, the feeling stable and grounded, and being able to put roots down. And if you're intentional about that, again, it's a game changer.
I was going to follow up a little bit on personally there. You've said you've gone through this process several times and you've studied it. And so, just from a distance, I would make this assumption that you've got this thing down to a science and you know how to do it, right? I'm curious for you, with however many moves that you've had.
Now
Okay, now you do, right? Okay, so that's why, the growth is what yields the learning, of course, right? So
yeah. I wrote the book I wanted to have available.
There it is.
When I was
Thank you.
But I did, I did learn the hard way. So I wanted to help, my fellow expats not to have to go through, the same kind of roller coaster, or at least to, a lesser extent. I've been drag kicking and screaming, and I've moved and made the most of it, fully committed. So I've had, all the different variations. Absolutely.
You've experienced them all. And thank you for earlier on there kind of outlining the U curve, and, it kind of like stages of grief, or, going through a transition of another type of change and things like that. I think it strikes me that there's probably so much going on in someone's life when they're relocating, that being caught off guard by the emotional impact and not preparing for that part of it sounds to have happened, right? On accident. There's just so many logistical things probably, or I'm starting this new job and I'm nervous or excited or whatever it is. Like you said, it sounds like a huge topic. I wanted to just briefly talk about the adventurer. Yeah, you talked about for work, for love, or for adventure. And I there's a program here in the United States on National Public Radio called This American Life. And I don't know how long ago I heard this, but it was called, I think, An American in Paris. And what they had done is they talked to a few people who had moved from the US to Paris because of the romantic notion of moving there, just in the general sense, romantic notion, right? And ultimately what they concluded, I'm really simplifying here, but ultimately they just concluded that, after 6 weeks, that's where I live, right? It's not Paris in quotations anymore. It's just the place I live, right? And it made me think a little bit about that.
The honeymoon can only last so long, right?
Yeah,
and then,
that's what made me think
reality, of it. Then it's your new home. Make it work.
Exactly.
But, the thing with adventure, and I've seen that quite a few times, people just go, head first. They dive in, and it's all so exciting, and it's wonderful to have that kind of enthusiasm. But then they're completely unprepared for what's coming. Like you said, they think it's all going to be like super fun and easy, and then their kid doesn't want to go to school, and they're like, but why?
Yeah, goodness.
And or they don't think long term, and they're like, we want our kids to learn the new language, and they're going to throw them into the local school. The kids don't speak a word, and the first few months are tough, right? Yeah. It gets better. But just be prepared that the first few months, your kids are going to be like throwing tantrums and not having any friends and So it's really all about expectations, I think, and kind of anticipating a little bit and preparing a little bit. Yeah.
So let's kind of use that as an opportunity to kind of shift, to transition gears of our own here in our conversation, because whether it's as an expat unprepared in a new country and you're not quite, the honeymoon was quick and now we're moving on to all the other emotions, or it's something else in our lives that's a totally separate topic to what we've talked about so far. People can get to a place where they're stuck, whether they know it or not. Maybe even they can get to these places where they're having a hard time breaking through and finding whatever is their next thing, or embracing the right mindset, right? And let's start to get into what you do as a reinvention coach. So on your website, there's this quiz. It's called the Break Free Quiz, and I'd encourage everybody to check it out if you want. The link will be in the show notes, but it asks a variety of questions about work and personal life and other things. And there are a few themes in some of the questions in this Break Free Quiz that you're asking us to answer for ourselves. You ask us about values. You just referenced expectations a couple of minutes ago. We talk about growth. You ask about growth, what we want for our own growth, our partner in life, the environment we're in. Are any one of these things kind of more important than the other when it comes to how someone sees themselves in their life, and that just general idea?
Well, you said it. You said how someone sees themselves, and I was going to say, every stuckness is unique and different, just like every move. But what makes a difference is not whether it's professional or a relationship or a location or whatever. And of course, I want to acknowledge that there are some circumstances that are very real and very limiting. Your company sends you to a new country, you don't get to choose, or you get to get a different job, right? So you don't really, you can't do that. Or you're in a toxic relationship and you're financially dependent and can't leave, or you have young children and can't leave, or you hate your job but you can't leave because otherwise how are you going to survive? So there are circumstances that can keep us stuck. But I think at the end of the day, if you dig deeper, it's a lot about how we approach the circumstances. So it's a lot, or like 90% is about mindset. And mindset is kind of at the core of my work, because it makes such a difference. First of all, recognizing what it is that keeps you stuck, what kind of approach or thinking, and then of course doing something about it, obviously. So again, irrespective of the area, what can keep you stuck? It can be the difference between having a victim mindset versus an empowered one, right? So do you see things as happening to you? Do you feel like you don't have a choice? Do you take responsibility for your choices and for your life, and actually feel empowered to make those choices? Do you have a fixed or a growth mindset? Again, the things that happen to you, is it something kind of like, oh my God, there's nothing I can do about it, or this challenge is a learning opportunity and I can rise above. I have, it's kind of the Carol Dweck kind of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Is failure just kind of a terminal thing, or is it a stepping stone to on our path to success? Do you focus on all the barriers and all the things that come in your way, or do you focus on the possibilities? Do you focus on what's available for you? Again, here, just to give an example, if you focus on the barriers, that's what your brain is going to see, or more of that, right? If you're not if you're focusing on your goal, your vision, then your brain will naturally see more opportunities, because you will filter the information that's coming at you through that lens. So it's a lot about attitude. So that's one big part of the being stuck. Again, that doesn't have to do with a specific area. And the other part that I found, that, and both can coexist, and they do, is all the is the conditioning. So basically, all the beliefs, the way we were, the beliefs we adopted early on in life because of how we were raised, our parents and family, the labels of the roles we took on. Maybe it's an event that happened, and it really doesn't have to be super traumatic. It can be just one thing that happened to you, and it shaped the way you see a certain aspect of life. I don't know. I had a bad experience when I was 10, public speaking. I'm not a good public speaker. I will never speak again. It took me 30 years to speak.
Yeah.
Right? I love it. I love speaking, but I couldn't do it for 30 years because of one thing that happened to me. So these things are shaped early on, and they can serve us in the moment, but they stay with us through life. And a lot of them are not conscious. So they really shape the way we approach our circumstances, and they shape our mindset as well. But they're stories. They're just stories. And if we're not aware of them, they keep us stuck. So I would say, I know all good things come in threes, but this one is I see mindset and conditioning are like my two big pillars of stuckness here.
Okay. That's very clarifying. Thank you for sharing all that. And also for the example. I think even if someone hasn't had that direct experience of the speaking moment as a 10-year-old, they can imagine it or have seen it, right? I mean, something embarrassing at that impressionable age. And then suddenly I'm a bad public speaker, and that's it, right? That circumstance has kind of informed me moving forward in a fixed mindset type of way. And we can all relate to that. So thanks for sharing something like that. It strikes me that you have these two pillars, right? But if we kind of visualize them as like a box that we're opening and looking into, it's a little bit bigger than just the size of that box. It kind of goes into this enormous, science fiction type world of it's huge. It's really heavy stuff, right? And that gets us to this idea of it's one thing to kind of identify or help kind of see, oh, now I know. Maybe I have a hypothesis why I'm stuck, or one of the reasons why I might be stuck. And then the next part is, well, okay, now what? Right? And so for you, with the services and the work that you do with clients trying to help people in their lives, you have this reinvention roadmap, if I understand it right. And it's some steps to help people, I think, if I understand, get unstuck and to reinvent themselves. I would love for you to talk as much or as little as you want. You can do a little bit and I can ask from there, or you can walk us through the whole thing. But I think I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
The origins of the reinvention roadmap, real quickly, is I've been through multiple reinventions myself, personal and professional. And I've also worked with a lot of people going through their own, life transitions and reinventions. And I found that, again, even though every process is unique, there are certain steps that everyone goes through. And again, maybe the sequence is kind of different, or the duration of each step, but they're always there. And it's funny because ever since I developed the roadmap and I use it with my client, I noticed like, oh yes, this is actually working. So
that's good.
But it's which is always good, right? Validation. No, but so these 6 key steps are, first of all, establishing a healthy baseline. So if you're in survival mode, if you're in fight or flight, you don't sleep, you don't eat well, just really the basic. If you don't have time for yourself, if you don't, if your soul doesn't feel nurtured, which I think is as important as sleeping and eating and exercising and all that, then you cannot think creatively about the future. You can't set goals. You can't, work on strategies, and reinvention is kind of a distant dream, right? You first need to feel like you're not surviving. So that's the absolute first step that I go through, because a lot of people who come to me, they're, feeling stuck and be very exhausting. And there's a lot of circumstances in their lives that, that leave them depleted. And so they are in this kind of survival mode, or their minds are in that mode. So that's the first step. Then then there's the reconnect and reclaim, I call it. There's going back to the essence of who you were before all the conditioning we just talked about. Before all the layers were kind of piled on you. Because you may come today and say, "Hey, I've lost my, I don't feel confident," or or a lot of people say, "I don't recognize myself." Well, yourself is still there. Let's dig and find that confidence. You have it, it's in you. You've just moved away from it. You've lost touch because the beliefs, you think are yours, but they're not really. So we find that person again, right? So it's interesting because it's reinvention. It's supposed to be the person you become, but it's also, reconnecting to the
Going
person
back to
you become from that. Yeah. So then the third step is I call it the alignment framework. So it's you basically, you define and reconnect with your values, your sense of purpose, your vision. So it's a whole fulfillment aspect of life. What's really important for you? What difference do you want to make, big or small? Purpose doesn't have to be a scary kind of grand thing, right? It can, if I'm a coach, maybe I just want to change the world one person at a time. I don't have to kind of write a manifesto or something like that. But what gives your life meaning? Right. And vision, where do you want to go? Having a sense of what's on the other end. And then we start taking baby steps. You need to create momentum. You try out things. You see what works, what doesn't. You tweak. Maybe you tweak your goals also, or your vision. But you get a sense of what works, what doesn't work. You gain confidence because you start making decisions. You start making moves. So this I called the building momentum kind of phase. And again, I want to say that a lot of these steps, they overlap. Maybe you're, like I said, you define the vision, but then you take some steps, then you're like, yeah, maybe I need to go this direction. So you can always go back. Step number 5, very important, and that one comes up probably the whole time, is kind of dealing with the saboteurs. We call them in coaching, which is all the limiting beliefs, all the I'm not good enough, or I'm not whatever enough, or if I prioritize myself, I'm being selfish, or especially where I come from as a woman, you're raised to always put other people's needs ahead of your own. Otherwise, you're a bad mother, wife, daughter, whatever you want, or you're selfish, or it's kind of so it's all these things that are very deep that we start noticing, becoming aware, choosing different beliefs that are much more empowering. But it's a process, right? These things are very deep. So, and what happens when you start building momentum and feeling confident and all that, that's when a lot of them show up, because you're changing and you're growing, and it's a normal part of the process that you kind of you feel pulled to stay where you are. There's fear, there's imposter syndrome, all that stuff. So we deal with those, and then the final step is how to make the transformation sustainable. What kind of systems or habits do you need to develop that will make this change stick? The new you, or the old new you, whatever you want to call it, the reinvented you. I call it uncaged and unstoppable, because you just this is the new status quo. This is where you are now, and you're just making sure you make it as easy as possible to just keep that going. So yeah, I raced through them, but I hope it gives you kind of a sense. There's a progression, but there's also overlap and flexibility. It also depends on the person, right? And
it does,
and how they approach the process.
Yeah, and I respect. There's this saying that I've grown to love, which is I think it's all models are useless, some are useful, right? Kind of the irony of it. I appreciate it. So frameworks are great because we can wrap our minds around that, and we have to have some process, as you're suggesting, but we also should respect the individuality of the experience, as you're already saying, right? Each person is going to go through most of these things, but the way that they navigate them with your help is going to be a little bit different and unique, right? I want to make sure that I've just got these 6 things captured them correctly. So first, we're establishing that healthy baseline because, as you suggest, sometimes a lot of people, when they're reaching out for help, they're in a very difficult place, right? So we're trying to establish that healthy baseline and then reconnecting with ourself. Sometimes that involves looking at who you were before some of the conditioning I think you mentioned.
Mhm.
Third is the alignment, which is about values, vision, the kind of the person you want to be, the purpose you want to have, right? Fourth is building momentum through baby steps, testing things, understanding how that's going. And that sounds like an opportunity that is as exciting. And then the fifth step is dealing with saboteurs that are maybe trying to hold you back, right? But as we
slay them.
We slay them. That's beautiful. I love that. No, that's an inspiring way to say it. And as we work through those 4 and 5, we find what can sustain, right? We're trying to capture that momentum and then find a way that it can sustain with our, as you suggested, the reinvented version of ourselves. Is that pretty close?
Perfect.
Okay. So I frankly find that inspiring, right? And I hope people listening to this can kind of imagine themselves going through this, we'll call it a transformation. You call it a reinvention, right? I think a lot of us, and like you said for yourself, sometimes we can only speak for ourselves, but different phases of our lives, we have different challenges, right? I'm squarely mid-career, right? They're middle age, I guess. It sounds funny to say that, but I guess that's true. And certain parts of life are like autopilot, maybe, right? You're like, okay, have I actually stopped and thought about this recently, right? So I can absolutely identify and relate with some of the parts that you're calling out here. And I want to make sure that everybody will have the opportunity to connect with you and reach out if they find this inspiring, right? And we'll get to that in just a second. But before we wrap up, I ask everybody the same question at the end of our conversation on this podcast. And the question I'd like to ask you, Katia, is the same, which is, what is something that you've learned recently?
I'm doing a meditation teacher training certification. And so I've been meditating for about 6 years every day. So it wasn't something completely new, but I wanted to deepen my learning and maybe teach. I don't know, but I started doing this mostly for myself, honestly. And so I learned a lot about the philosophy behind meditation, which is really beautiful, but also sometimes uncomfortable. So I learned about impermanence. And the Buddha said, we're all gonna age, we're all going to get sick, and we're all going to die. Oh, and the people we love and everything we love, it's also going to go away because it's not permanent. And, you can hear this and be completely depressed. Or you can actually get the real message behind that, which is, hey, it's not going to last forever, but why don't we just enjoy the present and actually be present now and be grateful for everything? And it's such a positive and uplifting message. So for me, that was a revelation, because the first time I read these remembrances, I had the first reaction, which is like, oh my god. so I, that's been amazing to learn that, and also to see how meditation it is incredibly effective, in so many areas, in stress reduction and anxiety and depression and all that. But also, it's a lot about how to use it to create the life you want, and to know yourself and to know what you really want to, basically to transform and reinvent. And I found so much resonance with my work. So it was kind of an unexpected gift. So, long answer, sorry.
No, that's a beautiful answer.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. And I personally always enjoy hearing the answers to these questions, because you just never know what you're going to get. And it's just usually very personal too, right? Which is very cool. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. Yeah. So Katia, we have had an interesting conversation today. I've enjoyed it a lot. I've learned a lot. We talked a little bit about expats and kind of the emotional handling of this process for people, talked about people maybe who are feeling stuck in some part of their lives. And then we've also talked about your reinvention roadmap, right? Which is, I always find it inspiring when people are trying to help others, and it's usually based off of the experiences they've had themselves, and they find the courage to go out there and help others, right? So for others who would like to reach out to you or learn more about you, where would you like to direct them?
Best place to find me is my website, and it's easy, katiavlachos.com. All my social media is there, but I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. So please connect with me if, you want to exchange or find out more about me or ask questions or whatever. I'm happy to connect with people. Yeah, and like I said, I'm also on Instagram and all that, but mostly I'm on LinkedIn and on my website. So that's the best way to find me.
And I'll have both of those links in the episode notes, so anybody can they're one tap or one click away. So we'll have them be able to connect with you easily. Katia, it's been my pleasure today, and thank you so much for being generous with your time from all the way in Switzerland. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you, Jason. It's been wonderful.
There's my conversation with Katia Vlachos. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Really, I loved the topic of expatriation, just something I hadn't given a lot of thought to before preparing for this discussion. And I've learned a lot about it, and really thinking as well about how for those of us who have moved around in our lives, whether it's to different countries or different states, maybe even different neighborhoods in large cities, to be honest, how a lot of these discussions apply to our lives. So I found it pretty interesting, and I hope you did as well. It's funny, right after we stopped recording, as Katia and I wrapped things up, she had mentioned, I never even mentioned my upcoming book, which is called Uncaged. So there is a reference to that in the show notes. Make sure you go to her site, check out any information that she's pushing about her upcoming book. Please make sure to do that. Anyway, quick reminder, reach out to me, startyourvoyage@gmail.com. The website is leadership.voyage. Subscribe if you're not, so you can get the latest episodes coming to your phone or your computer as soon as they are released in season 3 here. And remember that Instacart free delivery on your first order over $35. It's in the show notes all the way at the bottom. Check it out. Show your support for the show if you want. But let's get to the episode summary, because Katia and I discussed quite a few things, and I want to make sure that you can have that quick, concise recap at the end to help solidify the info. So, expatriation. Once you leave where you grew up, it's hard to find that sense of belonging again. You're a foreigner in a new place when you move, that's called expatriation, and also when you go back home, you're also a foreigner, that's repatriation. Learn to be at home wherever you are. Both you and the places that you leave behind change. I thought that was very interesting. If you go back home, approach it as another expatriation. Again, we've talked about that a little bit just a second ago, but very, very interesting concept. Once again, bringing it all together. When you leave a place, it also changes when you're gone. I thought that was kind of an epiphany for me, to be honest. Learn to be at home with people rather than with places. Okay, next section is about her first book, A Great Move. People who voluntarily move do so for 3 reasons primarily, and that is career prospects, love, or adventure. The attitude of the adventurer is wonderful, but it can lead to being unprepared. It's important to understand the transition stages when you move. There's a honeymoon, crisis, recovery, and adjustment. Personality traits affect the emotional impact, and creating home is a key pillar of getting to a point of stability and being grounded when you move. Okay, the second half of our discussion comes back to this idea of being stuck and reinvention. So when someone's stuck, the factors that might affect us are our values, expectations, growth prospects, our partner, or our environment. And some circumstances can keep us stuck, but 90% is about how we approach it. It's about our mindset. Focusing on the barriers as opposed to focusing on your goals or vision is really this distinction. So yes, conditioning, in other words, our upbringing, labels, roles, events, those things matter and they do shape us. But once we're aware of this, now it comes to the reinvention part of things. Katia's reinvention roadmap is 6 parts. First, establish a healthy baseline, then reconnect with ourselves, then align with our values, vision, and purpose, then build momentum with baby steps, then deal with saboteurs, and finally sustain the reinvented person that you have become. And we talked about how sometimes reinvention is actually going back to who you really are in spirit, and I really loved that. Okay, there is your episode recap for my discussion with Dr. Katia Vlachos. Everybody, until next time, please take care.